it's really the surprise for me here is how many of you I recognize from back in the good old days in Alberta Conference. I spent 10 years on that staff there and trotted around, got to know so many of you, and this is really quite warming to my heart to see so many of you friends and to realize that all of us have aged about, I don't know, a few years. I mean, all of you, of course, and not me. Well, maybe it's gotten a little grayer, but anyway. No, it's really quite good, quite wonderful. And I have to tell you how it is that I got here. Bev and I are, Bev, by the way, she's, I don't know what she's doing. There are all kinds of events here at this seniors residence where we live, and she's doing something. I think it's painting, actually. But anyway, we arrived here quite unexpectedly. We were going along just fine, being very happy retirees, when a couple of medical problems hit us whack between the eyes. In my case, it was some heart problems, and in Bev's case, it was some cognitive impairment. And the two of them made it very necessary for us to sort of simplify our life. And we moved into the Dorchester, it's called, a retirement residence here in Kelowna. And that was very good and everything, except that I realized as I looked around this room of about 150 people eating their meals there, that this was an entirely different generation. And so, being the old writer, I started digging around, and I discovered that there was almost nothing written about the old. I'm talking about people who have made it through the earlier years of healthy, I call it an extended middle age, from the time you retire until your late 70s or early 80s, when something gobsmacks you in the face and you realize that you no longer can do whatever it is, volunteering as much as you did, or traveling, or whatever it was that you did. This is a whole different reality, and yet nobody is writing about it. I picked up a copy of Zoomer magazine, and I was kind of offended by it because all of the ads and all the pictures showed me 50-year-olds. And it's supposed to be a magazine for seniors. And we, us older seniors, are completely left out of that picture. We're left out of the popular stuff. Now, there's all kinds of really good professional stuff written about us, and if it's written by professionals, healthcare professionals, for other healthcare professionals, but there's almost nothing written at the level where ordinary people like me and you can understand it. And so I wondered, what would that be like? And then one day I found myself in a conversation with an old friend from the publishing business, Howard Wright of Douglas and McIntyre, and I was telling him about this, and he said, "Ralph, write the book." And I said, "I can't, I'm retired." He said, "Write the book." So I started digging around, and it became just a delightful kind of an experience to discover that this was not such a terrible time of life as I had thought it would be. In fact, there is abundant research to say that people in their 80s are probably at a happier time in their life than they have ever been. Apparently, what they did was they asked the whole people of a variety of age groups and so forth, "Are you happy?" And the highest number of people who said they were happy was aged 82. Now, I've kind of passed that by now. I'm sort of almost pushing into 90. Would you believe that? 90 years old? Some years ago, our son, who understands numbers and things, was doing a spreadsheet for us to find out whether or not we'd have to eat canned cat food in our retirement. And he asked me, he said, "Dad, how long are you planning to live?" I had never given it much thought. And I said, "Well, maybe into my 70s. And now suddenly here I am in my upper 80s, and I'm still alive, and I'm still kicking, and I'm just as well and just as vigorous as my father was when he died at age 63. Then I became aware that this age group of ours the old, or the seniors, or the wrinkled pioneers, or the geezer generation, whatever you want to call it. We are the fastest growing demographic. We really are. And there's a whole lot more of us than anybody would have imagined. In fact, when I think it was the Covet epidemic kind of gobsmacked that reality into people's faces when they started counting the coffins that were going out of the seniors' residence. Because the older people, somebody was talking to me, the older people were dying at a greater rate than anybody else. And some of those seniors' residents were really awful. I thought they were all gone. They weren't like that, but they are gone. And it's really quite bad in some of those places. Not in all of them. Places like the one that we live in is absolutely superb. And the woman who is the social director here has a genuine ministry to the older people. She doesn't phrase it in Christian terms, but I do. So anyway, this is the first time since I was gainfully employed, since I retired when the new century began, that I have felt the sort of sense of a push in the small of the back. Sort of, I've never sorted out. Maybe I'll get Bill Phipps. Bill, have you got any sort of theology about when it's a divine calling or when it's your own ego? Do you know? I'm asking a question, Bill. You're always up with an answer.
No. I have no idea, Ralph. Just like I had no idea before. But I agree about getting older and being happy and so on. But I'm not 82 yet, so I guess I'm not at the peak of happiness.
No, not yet. No, you're still one of the children here. Yeah. What ages do we have here? How many are over 80? Raise your hands. Yeah. Okay. How many expect to live to be 100? I mean, there are all kinds of them. We have several here. I was really quite disturbed. I was in an exercise class, and I was sitting next to a fellow who was 103, and he was doing the exercises more vigorously than I was. And I found that downright insensitive on his part to be doing it that way. But nevertheless, this has become quite an interesting place to do some of the basic research and to really get to know a whole lot of the people. The COVID epidemic has made a whole lot of things interesting that were just not there before. For instance, this Zoom thing. I'd heard of Zoom before this, but I'd never really used it or knew what it was. And all of a sudden, we found ourselves Zooming 3 or 4 times a week for personal reasons, family reasons, and other reasons and so forth. And I was able to gather 2 groups of 25 people, most of whom were in this age group, as well as a few professionals and so forth, to go through the various issues with me that resulted finally in the book. And that was really very useful. I could never have afforded to do that, to gather these people together in the flesh. So anyway, and I'm finding that, well, one of the questions the publishers asked me was, hey, are you going to be able to go and do the author tour? You know, traveling around, standing on your hind legs, pretending you know something and trying to sell books. Well, I said, no, I can't do that. I mean, I've done that and I'm finished with it. And my heart won't stand up to it. And besides, I don't want to leave Bev. So that was off. But we've been able to do that via this Zoom thing. This is about my 4th or 5th speaking engagement from my bedroom. Whoever thought I'd be making speeches in my bedroom? Anyway, so where are we here now?
Or at least not to that number of people, eh, Ralph?
Well, no, exactly. You know, we're not in that business of displaying what we do in our bedroom. There's probably more money in it than there is in this. But anyway, I want to tell you about an incident that happened a number of years ago. This was on just after Christmas, on the Sunday after Christmas. We were at what was then First United Church, And the bakers who were sharing the ministry there, they had me doing the service almost every New Year, every Sunday after Christmas. They would take that time off, and I would. Anyway, Bev and I woke up that morning to about a foot of snow, and we thought, "Oh, this is terrible," you know. We got into our car. Fortunately, we had a four-wheel drive, and it worked fine. We got there, but we were saying to each other, "Oh, there'll only be maybe half dozen people who just gather together and have an informal chat, sort of thing," you know. Well, I was totally wrong, but the people who gathered were the people like yourselves. These were the movers and shakers of the church, the people who gave more in terms of money and gave more in terms of time than any other group. They were the folks who were in the 75 to up group. And it just happened that that Sunday, the lectionary, the gospel reading, was from the second chapter of Luke, the story of Anna and Simeon, which I just said, "Oh, this is really appropriate." Because Anna and Simeon were the old farts living there in the temple. They were doing all kinds of stuff. And Anna was easily, by any imagination, the first Christian evangelist who went out and told everybody who'd stand still about this child she had seen. And the old Simeon, at the end of seeing this, says, "Now, finally, I am prepared to die because God has shown me the promise of the Messiah." And so I, just on the spur of the moment, inducted those people into the holy order of Anna and Simeon, because they were the ones who were keeping that church going. They were the ones who provided the support of just about everything that went. If they stopped and moved somewhere else, the church would collapse. Would you say that's true, Bob? Where's Bob? Where did Bob get you? You're turned on.
Yeah, I would say that's true, Ralph. And even last Sunday after church, looking at all the people who were standing around drinking coffee, most of us were in your age group or approaching it.
Mm-hmm, yeah. So I'm not suggesting that the ministry of the church should be entirely to these people. But I think for the most part, we are a neglected group. Not that we've been pushed aside or anything, but the programming of the church has been largely for people in the children, should keep on doing that very much, and younger adults and the middle-aged people. But what we mostly do for the older folk of my age is entertain them. And I remember my mother saying one time, "You know, the trouble with getting old is that nobody needs you for anything. All they ever do is entertain you." She was living in Lyons Manor in Winnipeg, and they have all kinds of groups coming to sing to us and talk to us, but nobody wants us to do anything. And I remembered the kind of programming we had done at First United, and most of it was, you know, something to keep these old folks busy so they stay out of our hair. Now, I know that in many cases, some of the churches, like for instance, one of the churches here we're in Kelowna, yes. One of the churches here in Kelowna is almost entirely of geriatric people who are ready to turn their toes up. And but supposing that the church decided that a major part of its ministry was going to be to people like you and me, what would that be like? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it's a valid question that should be debated and thought about, that possibly as the United Church is declining in so many different ways, that maybe the ministry of the United Church should be more, or possibly a great deal more, with the older folks, the folks who are living the last years of their lives. When we moved into this retirement home, Bev and I knew very well that we would leave here horizontally, either to a hospital or a morgue, one or the other, and that this was the last place we would ever live. And then the question was, well, who are we now that we are in this age group? I want you to know that my one claim to really international fame is that I was born within a few days of Elvis Presley. You don't know that? Elvis Presley was born about 3 or 4 days after I was. Thank you, Bill. And so I must be famous, right? Well, anyway, but the question arose in one of the discussions: if Elvis Presley should suddenly come, and you know he is still alive. You just check those magazines in the checkout counter; they'll tell you. You know, there was one just very recently that said, and they are absolutely true because they're newspapers, so they must be printing the truth. They said that some archaeologists had found the skeletons of Adam and Eve somewhere in Russia. How about that? You didn't know that, did you? Well, anyway, the thing was that where was I? One of the problems with getting older is you lose track of what you're saying. But anyway, I was suggesting that we have certain, the identity. Who are you now, Ralph? Now that you're 87 and you're probably most certainly in your last decade of life. I mean, it's possible I might live past 100, but I hope not. But who are you now? What's your identity? What good are you? What's your calling in life? And then I started talking to the woman here at the Dorchester who sees to the people coming in and leaving, and she said the most difficult problems that most seniors have is the problem identity and of being able to control their own destinies. She says, so often I have people coming in here, it's a young couple or a daughter, and it's very often a week after Christmas, they've discovered that mom is living in an apartment all by herself and living on tea and toast. And that just doesn't right. But mom, on the other hand, is saying, no, I'm not ready to go into such a place. There is a communications gap between those people. And one of the reasons for writing this book was to say to the folks like that are the age of our own kids, hey, listen, you need to know what being old is like, because A, you don't know, so you need to know that so you can understand your mother and your father, and B, you're going to be there sometime. At some point, you are going to be old, and you need to know what that's like a little bit so you're not blindsided by it. But the question of identity, who are you? I had the privilege of being still a writer, but what am I going to be when I can't do that anymore? This book took me at least twice as long and twice as much effort as any other book I've written. And it wasn't because I did that much more research. It's because I kept making all kinds of errors and creating problems for myself that I thought I had dealt with years ago. It was really quite disconcerting when the book went to the first editor, and he came back with all kinds of corrections that I said, I couldn't possibly have done. That's not me, you know. But nevertheless, there they were. So I had to do a whole lot more work and send it back for another editing because I had goofed in so many places. And it wasn't because I didn't know this, it's because I had forgotten it. But still, you know, when I stopped being old, when I stopped being a writer, rather, who will I be? Bev doesn't have that much of a problem. She has been minister emeritus at First United, now Central Okanagan Church, for many years, and she sees her role there as the time over coffee of going around and talking to people, and especially welcoming people who are new. And so she now just continues to do that. It takes her forever to get from the elevator to the dining room, because she's talking to people and checking with them how they're doing and so forth. And it is a ministry, and she will carry that on. And people are not at all concerned about the fact that she forgets who they were. In fact, there's a little bit of a liturgy that happens here at the dining table, just about every meal. You sit down with somebody and you say, I know you are, but I've forgotten your name. Oh, that's all right. I've forgotten your name too. So we both forgot the names, and we review that, and then we carry on with the conversation. But it's this recognition of having more limited capacity. The whole idea of retirement happening at 65 was something that some bureaucrat in Washington dreamed up. At 65 was that was the time when most people died. And that was most of the men in those days were the ones, and they would get their gold watch at age 65, and they'd sit on the front porch and smoke a pipe for a year or so, and then they would die. That's the only decent thing to do. And the women, for their part, well, once they had reached menopause and they could no longer bear any more children, well, they had outlived their usefulness, so we should do the decent thing and die also. But somehow there were a whole bunch of us who said we're not going to do that decent thing, or at least it didn't happen to us. And so here we are. And I said that we should extend the whole concept of David Gilchrist, you're waving your hand. Are you trying to get my attention, David? Your mic is turned off. Your mic is turned off, David. We can't hear you, David. Your mic is off. David, your mic is turned off. Try that again. Your mic is turned off. Well, I don't know what he's saying. Can any of you people lip read?
He may not be talking to you, so I would just go ahead.
Oh, okay. Oh, yes. And so I said that old age should start at that point when you're in your late 70s or early 80s, when something, usually a health event or some other event in your life, the loss of a spouse or that sort of thing, changes who you are and what you do. And that old age should begin at that point. That's when we should consider ourselves to be retired, not before that. And then just a few weeks after that, somebody came up with this article from the I don't know, newspaper, and it says that the old age is now to be, well, what they say here is 0 to 17 years old, underage, 18 to 65 years old, youth and young people, 66 to 79 years old, middle-aged, 80 to 99 years old, elderly or senior. And that's the age we are in. Notice they say 80 to 99. So if you're not in the 80 to 99, you have no right to call yourselves old. You got that? Yeah, thank you, Eva. And then 100 years plus old is a long-lived elderly. And some of those long-lived elderly people, there's one woman here who is brighter and happier and more active and so forth, and she's 103 years old. And she's just a going concern. And you ask her how she does it, she says, I have no idea. But I'm enjoying every minute, and I hope that I don't go into some kind of a slow decline, but that I just go pop off someday. I've been talking about with a lot of the people here and others on the phone and so forth. One of the very interesting and happy things that's happened here at the Dorchesters is it's a package deal, and we get a free phone, so I can phone anybody in the world and talk to them, and I've done that. But when you raise the question of dying, are you afraid of death? And virtually all of them say, no, I'm not afraid of death. I'm afraid of the process of dying. That's the whole thing. But that has changed too. One of the books that I have really enjoyed, I'll show it to you here. It's called A Good Death, and it's written by Sandra Martin, who was a medical doctor in Britain, specializing in palliative care. And she says that very seldom now is dying a painful and an awful struggle. Pain, she talks about a whole series of having been at people's bedside as they died. And in most cases, it's a slow fading, more and more sleeping, and finally drifting off. And that's when the whole idea of Shakespeare's second childishness. Do you remember from your high school Shakespeare that play from As You Like It. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrance, and one person in their time plays many parts. The first being the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms, and then he goes through all of the others. And finally, second childishness, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans everything. The process of dying now is usually a slow slipping away and a narrowing of your world. When you come into the world, there is only you. A newborn baby is totally selfish. But as it grows, it becomes more aware of the mother and then of the other people in its life, and gradually its world expands and expands and expands until after a while, it starts to contract. One of the things you realize as you get old is that your social circle just really narrows. And when you retire from your work, you suddenly realize that you're out of the loop. You really are. You don't know what's going on. But that world continues to shrink until it's just the family, just your most close loved ones and family. Eventually, it's just you and God. And that's the process of dying. And most people have not given it any thought. They are struggling, in a few cases, just to desperately keep themselves alive. When Bev was the minister in Winfield, there was a man in a congregation who was diagnosed with a rather severe heart attack, and the doctor told him that the secret of is exercise and healthy eating. So his wife started making him health food, which he hated. I think he began to realize that the whole term health food is an oxymoron. But he did that, and then he would walk, and he would walk, and he would walk, and it was this constant day long. Every day he was out there walking, and 5 years later he dropped dead. The thing is, I don't think he enjoyed a single day of those 5 years. He was so concentrating on keeping himself alive. And that can be the tragedy of some older people and some of the ministry that we need to have. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. Not at all the worst thing. Death is a natural part of life, and it is to be used and welcomed. If we didn't have death, we would never have anything new happening. We would never have anybody coming along and telling Bill Phipps that he was really out to lunch, that that the fundamentalists really were right. No, well, not likely. But nevertheless, we need to have these new people coming along and thinking new thoughts and doing new things so that the world can move ahead. I'm kind of an eternal optimist. I do believe that humanity is making progress. It's with lots of fits and starts and backsliding and so forth, but overall, some years ago, I wrote a book. I did a novel called Julian's Cell, this one here. And it's a novel about Julian of Norwich, who lived at the beginning of the 14th century, or the beginning of the 14th century. And it was probably the worst time that has ever been in memory. There were plagues. There were 2 plagues during her lifetime. There were a whole bunch of wars. The bishop of her area was known as the Episcopus Meritus, in other words, the fighting bishop, and he decided to go to put. He was more comfortable in a suit of armor than he was in his clericals, and what he did was go around, and anybody who disagreed with him, that. There were cattle epidemics and that sort of thing. And yet she came out with a statement that is echoed down through the centuries. All is well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. She wasn't talking about, everything's going to be all right, everything's going to be all right. That wasn't the kind of optimism she's talking about. But in the long history of humanity, in the long view of God, humans are progressing. They really are. And I believe that very much. So I've talked enough. Somebody tell me I'm full of baloney.
We wouldn't dare.
Oh, yes, they would. I know some of these people better than you do, and they would. They see there's Bill Phipps right away. See?
Well, Ralph, yeah. Ralph, I remember a friend of mine who was a minister in Colorado, and this was, I don't know, 35 years ago. And he was called as a minister to basically older people. Like, you know, it was one of those churches dying, and there's mainly older people, and they were all had their knickers in a knot because they couldn't attract young people. The whole thing was, we got to attract young people,
Mhm.
you know, and all this frenzy about that. And he basically said to them, calm down, look who's here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Be a ministry to people your age. At least do that. At least be a loving community and creating opportunities for new ideas among, you know, older people. Don't get yourselves all worked up. Young people aren't going to come. I mean,
Mhm.
he was quite blunt about the whole thing. But I'll never forget him sort of saying, work with what you have and love what you have there. Now, I don't know what happened to that congregation, but I thought that was pretty good advice to that group of people.
Mhm. Mhm. Somebody have something to add to that? Bev and I attended a church this summer. I won't tell you where it was, and we realized that the church was relatively full for being in the middle of the pandemic. But anyway, we thought that we were probably the youngest people in that congregation, and so, you know, what was the future of that? You can do all you want, Bill, to say we need more young people, but the young people aren't going to come if there's only old people there. They're just not going to do it.
Ralph, unless I'm mistaken, you're the author of those two little books, 41 Uses for a Grandmother and 40 Uses for a Grandfather?
No, I'm not. I wish I was, though. Yeah, I'm not, Terry.
Okay, well, I associate them with you, but those two little books we've read many times with our grandchildren, and they kind of remind me that even a lowly grandfather, grandmother can have all kinds of significant roles in a child's life.
Mhm.
Our kids read them and read them and read them, our grandchildren.
And great grandchildren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sam Keen, the philosopher, once said that the vocation of the grandparent is to delight in the grandchild, which I think is quite profound. To delight in the grandchild, not to control the grandchild or to babysit the grandchild or any of those things, simply to delight in the grandchild. But then we should extend that and say to our young people, your vocation as a child, a young person, is to delight in your grandparents and to try and see who they are and what they are and how they can be part of your life in a meaningful way. We have two grandchildren that are just on the cusp of moving out into the world and finding out what their jobs, their vocations, their careers are going to be about. One of them is just recently married, the other one just getting ready to be married, and their whole world is in front of them. And so I just really quite delight in the things that they are thinking about and working toward and so forth. It's really quite wonderful.
Ralph, one of the challenges that's come up here in the Kelowna area in this amalgamation is trying to figure out how to rename the work of the church. And gratefully, we have been blessed with the person who decided that the work of working with people is intergenerational ministry, not children, youth, and adults. And the whole emphasis is to try to build that connectedness and that excitement one with the other. And one of the things Cheryl said the other day was that she's afraid that a lot of grandparents think they have to still act as the authority to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren rather than to enjoy them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this whole business of wisdom, the wisdom of the aged. I can't think of any wisdom that I've particularly accumulated, other than maybe there's not nearly as many things that bother me as there used to. If that's wisdom, then I got it. But other than that, buy low, sell high. Does that do? I don't think we have much wisdom. I don't know what wisdom would look like in this electronic world, but it is quite a delight to get into really deep conversations with grandchildren about some of the things that they're struggling towards. One of them is planning to be a lawyer, and we talk about the problem of being a lawyer. If that a lawyer who has ethics and who's concerned about what is right more than what is legal. It's going to be a very interesting vocation for him.
Ralph, one of the things I think grandchildren, and in our case, great-grandchildren, we have 4 here in Lethbridge, they help us relearn how to play. And that's a really important gift that they give us, and we can give back.
Yes, which, by the way, is one of the gifts that we need to work at to help older people develop and use their sense of humor. And when I talk about a sense of humor, I'm not talking about the ability to tell jokes. The ability to tell jokes is a theatrical experience or a skill. It's the sense of humor is, well, it's like my old grandmother. One day she sort of fell into one of these old big bread boxes, and she was quite portly, and she all she could do was to laugh. And the more she laughed, the deeper she got down into it, until finally, several hours later, she was still laughing. Somebody came and pulled her out. But that's what I mean by a sense of humor, the ability to laugh or to enjoy the richness and the ridiculousness of this life that we live. It's hard sometimes, but it's good to try and struggle and try and see the funny side of it.
Leroy Angle here. I have a question or comment on the other side of the picture. Once when I was in Olds, there was a lady there, 95 years old, had her birthday. So I went to congratulate her on 95, and, being a fairly young guy at the time, I said, and I wish you many more. And her response was, oh, don't wish that on me. And when I got thinking about it, I had actually had the funeral of her son. All her acquaintances and friends had died 20 years ago. And here she sat, and you talk about who am I at this stage in life. And I think that it seems to me, in reflecting on what you've said, is that she was a person without an identity at that stage in her life. And, I began to feel that way too for myself, because my grandchildren and children are right here to do anything that they can possibly do that we really don't need to have done yet.
Yes, it's not so much about adding years to your life as adding life to your years.
Yeah.
I want to live as long as I live, but when I can no longer live, in other words, when it becomes a kind of a walking corpse that really should just fall over, I want to die. And that Bill, you're laughing there a little bit, but that's true. I mean, I think I'm quite interested in this whole concept of the MAID, the medical assistance in dying thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope that at some point when I realize that the rich life is over, that I can then choose to simply die. We think of suicide as being a terrible thing, but I don't know. One of the people in our congregation, Beryl Itani, Bob, you will know who she is, that's for sure. But she said that her second husband, what was his name, Tom, had said at one point when he was diagnosed with a very severe form of cancer, he said, I want to die. And the doctor said, no, we can't do that for you. So he said, I'll do it for myself. And he simply stopped eating. And when I raised that question with one of these groups of 25 that I was telling you about earlier, they said, that happens way more often. than you would ever imagine. And it is not a painful thing. Doctors can't prescribe anything for you except maybe some painkillers. And there's ways to do that with the medical help that we have without any great problem. Now, how's that for? Go ahead.
My mother, on her 90th birthday, I said to her, "Oh, Mom, you'll probably live another 10 years." And she vehemently said, "Oh, I hope not." But the closer she got to 100, the more she wanted to live. And she lived to be 102 months and 2 weeks, and had a 100th birthday that when we rang the bell to get people's attention, she thought it was mealtime. And so she perked up very greatly, was ready to eat. But so there was quality of life pretty well right to the end. So and then she just stepped away, like you said, with family right there with her.
There are, in this retirement home that we're in, there is a substantial number, I can't give you any figures, but a substantial number of people who just are just sitting there and waiting to die. They are not living, they are just existing. I remember one very sad conversation at the table. I said to this lady, "And so what are you going to do between this morning?" She says, "I'll just go to my room and I'll wait for lunch." And then I said, "So what are you going to do in the afternoon?" "Well, I'll go to my room and wait for supper." This sort of depression, one of the discoveries, which is nothing exceptional, but is that loneliness is probably the most virulent disease that infects older people of any of them. Loneliness provides the kind of life that in which other things, heart disease, anything else, comes in and takes the person, COVID, whatever. But it's the underlying issue is the loneliness, and I mean real loneliness. These people just stay in their rooms and they don't do anything. The Stacy, the social director here, busts her backside trying to get these people out of their rooms and doing these things, and she is partially successful, but not totally. And that is certainly the truth with so many old people who are just sitting around waiting to die. And I certainly hope I don't have that kind of a living death. Bill?
Yeah. Leroy Angle here again. I can relate to that comment because I was the administrator of a seniors residence, the same as you are, that you're living in. And that was exactly the experience that people had. They came out for meals and went back to their room and waited for the next one. And we had an excellent social convener, but do you think she could get them out? Only for bingo, and that was only about 25 or 30%.
Yeah, I think David was in here next. David?
I was really motivated by your humors, and that whetted my appetite. When I came in here, I found out that there are certain people who feel, like you mentioned a little while ago, to be useful, to be able to do something, and they just come alive when somebody asks them to do it. But I found out too that people need to laugh, and because I told so many people about humors, I, for the last years, have got an incredible amount of humor in the emails. And some of them are excellent cartoons. And I got into the habit of taking the best of those cartoons, pasting them together, and putting them on the outside of my door to the hall. And I love to watch the shadow of the feet come under my door and stop there and hear people chuckling.
Yeah, and that's very good. As many of you, I would imagine, would remember Bob and Bruce Hatfield, medical doctors in Calgary.
Yeah.
Well, I was very close to Bob. He and I got together an awful lot, and he just at the time when he was retiring, he developed a leukemia, And he said he diagnosed many people in that sort of thing, and their lifespan was usually 5 to 7 years after diagnosis. And he decided that he was going to do a little different with his own self-diagnosis. He did all the things that the medical establishment asked him to do. He wasn't setting that aside at all. But he got himself looking at films and reading humor and so forth, and getting together with friends to sit and chuckle and laugh a lot. And he and I spent a week together in not in Banff. It was, well, it doesn't matter. But anyway, just basically telling each other funny stories, sort of thing. He said that didn't cure his illness. I mean, he died of it. But he said that added at least 2 years of good life to my lifespan. He was convinced of that. And on top of that, he said, and it made the other part of the dying even more, even less painful. Yeah. I will not forget, Jim Taylor and I drove out there when his wife phoned and said, if you want to see Bob before he dies, you better come. So we got in there, we drove all night, we got there. And there was the entire family gathered in the house there. They had sleeping bags all over the family room downstairs, and they were all there together. And they were adults and children together. When Bob needed to turn over because he was so weak he couldn't move his body at all, the entire family would gather around him, children as well as adults, and the entire family would help him roll over. And I was in tears seeing that. It just seemed such a beautiful and holy thing to be doing for this dad. But he and I had, even in the very end, I said when we came in, I said to him, I'm really tired from driving. So I said, move over, I want to lie down. He said, oh no, don't. He said, all they do is stick needles into you. That wasn't great humor, but it was good humor. It showed that he hadn't lost that sort of thing. And I saw the picture on the mantelpiece of the time when he was granted an LLD by the University of Calgary, and he's wearing his Snoopy tie. But
I remember, Ralph, he did workshops for churches all over Calgary and beyond on humor.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember a couple he did at Scarborough when I was minister there.
Yeah,
and it was terrific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he enjoyed that so much, and it added quality to his life too until the very end. Until the very end, he was.
Can I ask another question?
Only if it's one that I can answer.
Well, of course you can answer. You can answer anything, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, that's right.
Quite often, when I'm talking to people and about being, well, I guess I'm not old yet because I'm only 79.
Yeah.
They say, well, your role is being an elder.
Mm-hmm.
And your generation has wisdom that is needed in today's world. And so I hear the word wisdom and elderhood as being, a very important calling, actually, for people in our age bracket. But sometimes, in order to, if there is any wisdom to depart or to be an elder, people need to recognize that and need to want that kind of wisdom. And I agree about the wisdom and the elderhood, but I really have no idea how to offer it. Either, where is the venue and how is it offered? Because unless people recognize that might be a good contribution and something valuable, it's irrelevant. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, I think you've covered it pretty well, Bill. I mean, I think, no, I really can't, what is wisdom anyway? when we can define that. Your comment reminds me of a little incident at the church there. I was still wearing my black choir gown, and I was in the hall there, and a very young child came up to me and said, "Are you old?" And I said, yes, I'm old. And then she said, "Does it hurt?" And if I had my wits about me, I don't remember at all what I said, but it's probably something quite stupid. But thinking about it later, if I had my wits about me, I would have said, "Yes, little girl, it hurts. Sometimes it hurts like hell, but other times it's also wonderful and it's beautiful, and it's one of the best things that's ever happened to me is being old." Clint. Your mic's turn your mic on.
Yeah, there. Yeah, I wanted to make 2 or 3 points. One is when we did the Jewish Christian paper, Reuven Bolka commented on it. And one of the things he really appreciated was that we referred to the Testament that, he said you referred to it as the Older Testament and not the Old Testament. He says, "I very much like being older, but not too much being old." And that was one comment.
Yeah.
Second thing is these days it seems that being around live things is very important. And I notice in homes now, as I go in and visit people still, there are some that are really more alive, and they have animals and they have birds and plants, It seems to be very important. So that's the second thing, and you might comment on that. The third thing is just my wife's comment. She's a clinical psychologist and much younger than me. And she says when she gets to this stage, she's going to start a home. She's not just going to go to one, she's going to start one. But in her home, the outings are skydiving and bungee jumping, and there's unlimited volume for everybody. And whatever, you have rich foods, and you can have all the pie you want. And it's, just go into it with a vengeance, and if it takes you out, well, great. What a send off.
I remember sitting across the table from a woman who was looking at a great big dessert with all kinds of stuff on it. I don't know where she got it from, but she's looking at that and she says, "My doctor says I shouldn't eat this, but I'm 97. The hell with it." And she dug in.
That's awesome.
Well, yeah.
Ralph, I think we have time for maybe one more question, Ralph.
Okay. All right.
I noticed Tad had his hand up.
Okay. Tad, where'd you go to, Tad? They move on the screen here. I can't. Where are you, Tad?
I'm here.
Oh.
I'm here. I'm next to you on my screen.
Well, you're not next to me on my screen. So anyway, go ahead, Tad.
I am, I guess, oldest in this group. I'm next year, very soon, I'm going to be 90.
Yes, you are.
And my problem is I'm not afraid of death. I'm quite comfortable going to nowhere and unconscious. Nobody knows me and I don't know anybody. That may be a heaven for me. But the hell is now remembering the regrets. Remembering what I was like when I was ministry, when I was teaching at the university. All these things come back to me, and remember terrible things I said or did in terms of my desire to expand my ego. That comes one by one, and that really is hell to me. I don't know what to do with it. And last Sunday, my minister, Taylor Croissant, said the same thing. Hell is now when you start counting your regrets.
Yeah, and I have done that too, Tad, and in spades. Bev and I adopted twins when we were still very young, and they had both had fetal alcohol syndrome. And when the boy took his own life after he reached 20, we spent a lot of time with the woulda, coulda, shoulda, guilt things and so forth. I just by other than consciously saying, yes, there are all those terrible things that happen and things you have done and things you have said, but there are also wonderful things you have done and things you have said. And I know that about you, Tad, because I have heard so many things about you that, and 99% of them have been positive. That of your life and your ministry and your example, there's been just so much there that if you were going to, well, I wouldn't say we balance these things anyway, but there comes a time when you've got to say, okay, that was then, and that's what I did, and I lived by the light that I had, flickering as it was. But this is now, and this is the life that I have right now, and it's a beautiful life. And you are an inspiration to people in your 90th year, whether you like it or not.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. And thank you all for your questions and the lively discussion. If you haven't picked up a copy or had ordered a copy yet, it's available on Chapters Indigo, and it's available on Amazon, both in paperback or in electronic form on Kindle or Kobo. Is it available in other places that I've missed, Ralph?
Well, any reasonably decent bookstore has it. Yeah. Here in Kelowna, it's the Mosaic. Indigo sells a lot of trashy tourist stuff now, and their books supply is not that wonderful. Mm-hmm. But they are carrying it. Yeah, it's all over the place. It's being advertised up and down and sideways.
Yeah, I contacted Shelf Life Books here in the city, in Calgary, and they brought it in for me. It took about 10 days, but they'll get it.
Well, the booksellers have been, the book supplies have been having trouble with supplies, just like everybody else, especially here in BC. I'm waiting now to have another shipment. I have about a dozen books, different people who want them, it should have arrived last week. It hasn't here yet. So anyway, yeah, it's through the usual places, that you buy books normally.
Perfect. That's great. I got a Kindle copy because I prefer to carry around all my books with me for some reason. Yeah. I see Treena is tormenting us with pictures of puppies right now. So she had a special guest star. Oh, cute puppy kisses.
Well, we can't, I can't see, can we see her puppies? I can see your face, and it's a very nice face, but it's not as cute as Treena's puppies.
That is true.
Oh, there.
There you go.
Oh, there we are. Yes.
That's good. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Mutlow and to Shelley. We do want to acknowledge those who have passed in the last year and have a little time of memoriam and reflect upon their contributions in their lives.
And I would suggest maybe everyone could unmute, and when the names come up, if there's a particular memory you have, we don't have a lot of time, but just a very quick memory of a particular person. Do we have a list of names that we can put on the screen? And today, as they're pulling it up, this is the feast day of St. Ambrose. And Ambrose is mostly famous for teaching Augustine of Hippo. So again, the passing on of stories. And this has been a great storytelling event.
Roger. You have something to add?
We're waiting on the names.
Yeah, Shelley has a slide she's going to put up, Bob.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Bob. I seem to be in the wrong section. Where is that show my screen? If you could remind me.
While you're pulling it up, the first name that I have is the Reverend Goran from Medicine Hat. And Gary started ministry in La Flèche, Saskatchewan, and we stayed with him at the manse there. Any other memories that people quickly have of Gary Goran? I'm just on mute, so just holler them out. Was Gary Goran known quite well he was in Medicine Hat, and I gather did a funeral ministry there. There we are. So, okay, I began with Gary Goran, but we'll flip up to the top in a moment. Anything around Gary that anyone would want to add?
It's Bob speaking, and Bob Wallace. And Gary crossed our path on several occasions when he was in St. Albert, and we were in Castle Downs, and then in Medicine Hat when we were in the Lethbridge area. A big, friendly guy with lots of activity and lots of life, and a good conversationalist.
Yeah. High energy guy. He moved around a lot.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Reverend Robert Wright. I don't know that person. Someone want to say a word about Reverend Robert Wright?
Well, I will. It's Bill. I knew Robert when he was minister in Welland, Ontario, and he ran 4 times for the NDP there and lost each time. But he was a very strong social activist, social gospeler, really all of his life, and really lived it. And then he came, when I was executive secretary of the conference, he came on conference staff around mission development and so on. And so he was a good conference colleague. And then he went to Saddle Lake, Goodfish Lake, and really had a marvelous ministry there. I mean, they accepted him and welcomed him, and he lived out his life there. So
too long. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And Reverend George Rogers, and of course we all knew George. I actually did the funeral for George's mother-in-law. She was part of Woodcliff, quite a strong woman. And I went on, and as I was about to do the funeral, George asked if I was using Celebrate God's Presence. He was the ultimate United Church man. And I've been I was shocked to discover he died, and found that there's very little information out there about him. Even Sherwood United had no reference. Does anyone know what happened to George?
Well, he had cancer. I know, yes, and that was long standing. In fact, that was one of the first conversations I had with George, who was a stalwart supporter of the whole communications ministry during the decade that I was on conference staff there. And so I'm very grateful to George. But this was I think a cancer that he had before he was married.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I think that's true about George, and he was on conference staff before he was executive secretary. When I was executive secretary, he was part of our team. So
yeah,
we always thought he looked like Clark Kent.
And he went on. He ended up the principal of St. Andrews College in Saskatoon when they were in dire financial straits. And he suggested closing the place. And that was just like the Naramata gang that turned against the board that wanted to close Naramata. And then so St. Andrews is still going. But George was just really one of those solid people, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Reverend John Coe. I don't know John Coe. Does anyone remember John Coe?
I never met John, but he was really interested in web design before it was really big, and he actually put together the first website for the conference.
Okay. And Lois, Ling, does someone else have something to add?
I was just going to say that this is Peter in Cochrane. I knew John quite well. We shared some common interests in technology stuff. I served on a couple of committees with John, and he had a very diverse career in his life. He was a pilot and a pilot. He taught other people to fly as well, among other things. And I remember him quite well.
Okay.
I would just like to just add for George Rogers. He followed me at Sherwood Park, and I remember him very well, and his family, and we thoroughly enjoyed being with them.
Yes, for sure. Lois Ling, spouse of Reverend Leonard Ling, High River. Does anyone remember Lois?
Bob, Leonard and I were on staff at Pleasant Heights. Lois was a very compassionate woman who raised a family of, I think, very difficult children, and she loved them deeply and supported them and brought a tremendous presence in their family.
Okay.
Bob and I went and visited Betty in early November.
We've got someone else speaking right now. Go ahead.
Yes, it's Winnie Chesney Settle with Bob Settle. We visited Betty in early November as Peggy let us know that she was starting to decline, and COVID let us in, thank heavens. She was her wonderful, smiling, laughing, happy self that she's been all her life. And but she was living in the past and really happy there. And it was just a joy to hear her laughter and see her smiles and her love of life. But just a few weeks later, she started talking about wanting to go home, and she did, with family by her side.
Well, thank you. Ed Bardock, Lethbridge.
Well, Ed came out of McKillop United in Lethbridge, and Ed did a lot of difficult things in the school division, but he led in presbytery and in the congregation and at conference, as you know. But Ed was utterly fearless. Any room he walked into, he was a leader, and quite passionate and combative, and sometimes rubbed people the wrong way, but very true to his passions and his sense of ethics.
Yeah. Yes, I was on the conference executive with him. He was a great help and great insights. And we talked about Gary Goran, and now Betty Burse, spouse of the late Reverend Archie Burse, Red Deer. Anyone remember Betty?
Jeannie and I certainly do.
Yes.
I think we met them up in what was Peace River Presbytery when they're up there for a while, although I was acquainted with Archie before that. But anyway, and then they were in my congregation in Wetaskiwin. And somewhere along the line, we got on Betty Burse's mailing list at Christmas time. And it just became an annual ritual. We knew that Advent was started when we got our letter from Betty.
First letter from Betty. Yeah.
Oh,
She was very good. She really was the height of the community and loved gardening. She had so many flowers and such a green thumb to growing vegetables, flowers, everything. She taught me so much about gardening. And she was a soul. Like we were in the midst of trying to find a home down at that point. She says, "Don't you worry, my dear. You just move in right here. Archie and I are going to go away for a week, and you can move right into my place until you can get your home settled in once you get into Wetaskiwin." So she was. I always remember her because that's the way she dealt with people. Like she was such a heart. Yeah, and they worked in Calgary too, in one of the ministries here in Calgary, way before them. But they did well, yeah. And was a mother to many student nurses up in Lamont for a good number of years.
Wow. Yeah. And so we remember these people today, and we'll do so in the words of one of the traditional prayers that is in Celebrate God's Presence. And so we pray, "O God, before whom the generations rise and pass away, we praise you for all your servants who, having lived this life in faith, now live eternally with you. And especially we thank you for your servants, Robert and George, John and Lois, Ed and Gary and Betty, now gone from among us. We praise you for the gifts of their lives and for all in them that was kind and good, for the grace you gave them that kindled the love of your name and enabled them to serve you faithfully. We thank you that for them death is past and pain is ended, and they now have entered into the joy you have prepared. Rest eternal grant unto them, O Lord, and let light perpetual shine upon them. And the people said,
Amen.
Amen.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that. And thank you, Ralph, for sharing today. It was a rich and lively discussion. And
can I ask one favor here from all of you? This is the first of a whole bunch of these kinds of things that I'm going to be doing. And I would really like it if you folks could send me an email with your comments on how this went and suggestions for making it better. If you got a pencil out, I'll give you my email address. It's Ralph Milton, one word, 72, Ralph Milton 72, no spaces, no caps, at gmail.com. And I would really be very grateful if you would send me a note saying, this is something that you could do better, or this is something you might add, or this is something we could do without, whatever. Thank you. And thank you all for inviting me to do this. This has been really good, and it's just wonderful to see so many old friends.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Ralph.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ralph.
I would
See you
just
for lunch tomorrow.
Yes.
I'd like just to add one thing. It's Wilma. Thank you all for coming out today. That was wonderful. And I just was thinking as Bob was doing the names of all the people that pass, many of those just come to just by luck. So if you know of anybody that is deceased in the community or worked in the community, please let us know. You can either let Shelley know or anybody at the head office know. And because we do send cards, and what happened yesterday was I got a lovely phone call, Betty's daughter, Peggy, and thanking us for sending the card to them, and that we remembered her. So I think we try to do that all the time. I don't miss very many, although sometimes there isn't a family member to send it. Other than that, we try and do that. So if you can just let us know if you know, because we'd rather hear 10 times than not. So thank you.
And thank you all. We hope that you and pray that you have a blessed Advent and Christmas season. And God willing, we will see you all in the new year, maybe 1 month closer to the end of the pandemic. Who knows?
Oh, yeah.
Be well. Take care. God bless.
God bless.
Blessings, everyone.
Blessings.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Great.
Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, staff, for helping us out.
Oh, happy to be here.
Tell Peter I say hi, Treena.
Oh, I held him up there. Did you notice?
Was that Peter? It's hard to see. He was a little picture.
Yes.
Take care. Bye.
You too.